Thank you. I'm one of the co-founders of .org Community along with my partner, Sherry Budziak. And thank you for joining us. Just a couple slides of introduction about .org Community. We're, as most of you know, we're a membership club of extraordinary executives who strive to turn their ideas and talents into success. And as nonprofit professionals, your main focus is on your organization's mission. And our focus is to help and support you as you support your organization. We have a great lineup for 2017. We'll be continuing our monthly programs as well as our online webinars. And we also have 3 great signature events in 2017 with our Disruption Our Industry happening at the end of April, and then our Leadership Forum, and then, of course, our Solutions Day. Just a special shout out to our knowledge partners who made these monthly webinars and education possible. So we thank you very much for your continued support. There's multiple ways to find us online, so you can follow us through one or all of these different social media channels. And for those of us on the go, there's certainly an app for that. So we have 2 great applications for the iOS and Android phones for connecting with your colleagues and keeping up to date with our different events. And then just a plug for our next webinar in the new year on January 12th. Will be actually a part 2 of this series that is going to be delivered by John Forbes for his second part on January 12th. Just a few housekeeping. There will be the presentation and certificates available after the presentation, so I can send out a link to all of you to download that material. And also for those of you who are already not VIP members, we encourage you to join, and our VIP members get first priority in registration for all of our events for 2017. So if you're interested in signing up for that or upgrading to that membership, you can certainly contact me or Sherry will get you started on that great program. But now I just want to introduce our presenter today, John Forbes. John's been working with us over the last year or so. It's been a great asset to our community and our community members. John has some great experience working in the not-for-profit area, leading several of the nation's great medical societies out there. So we're very lucky to have him today giving us a quick 30 minutes on high-performance teams. And so I will turn this over to John, and if you have any questions for him afterwards, his contact info will be present after the presentation and with the download material. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. All right. I'm trying to advance the slide here. And there we go. There we go. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time that you've devoted to this morning's session. And thank Sherry and Kevin for their leadership in helping all of us advance our knowledge and skills as leaders in the association space. This work really stems from the work that I did with the American Academy of Pediatrics, where we had a leadership institute, and we taught pediatricians and staff and other stakeholders on leadership. And one of those modules was on teams and high-performance teams. And we trained over 3,000 pediatricians over a 10-year period. So a lot of experience in this space, and we realized from that work how important the functioning of teams are in associations for them to deliver value to their members. So the agenda for this presentation is to speak about high-performance teams. They're very, very rare in any work and very, very rare in associations as well. Talk about the ideal team player, what you'd like to have on your teams, and to speak about dysfunctional teams. In doing this work before, I'd spent about 20% of my time in a 2-hour workshop on the dysfunctional side, and found that people were so interested in identifying and correcting dysfunction that these workshops transformed into more about dealing with dysfunction than dealing with high performance. So that's the importance of this, is to help people understand that there is dysfunction, but they're really trying to become high-performing organizations. So let's see, I'm not advancing here. We're just a little stuck here. There we go. So what I'd like to have you take away from this presentation is an understanding of the benefits of high-performance teams, to help each of us improve how we not only lead, but how we also serve on teams, to help us deal with dysfunctional teams. We see that all the time, and ultimately long-term to improve organizational performance and the work that we do in associations. Okay, just not advancing here. So we'll start with the high-performance teams, and it's not advancing from, there we go. We certainly saw this in Chicago this year with the Chicago Cubs. A few weeks ago, Kevin and Sherry hosted a leadership summit of association leaders, and it was right the day after or so that the Cubs won the World Series. So we sort of spoke about this, and some of the content in this presentation comes from that day we spent together. So we actually co-created some of the content that exists in this presentation. But we talked about the Cubs and what made them successful this year. Go ahead, Kevin. Why don't you advance? There we go. And so the 3 levels. We talked about the organization. We talked about the managers and coaches and the players, and we saw that leadership, that word leadership, lives in all of these 3 people domains. Certainly the Ricketts family and their vision, their acquisition of the Cubs and what they've done to invest in their success. Their hiring of leadership and allowing them to do their job. Their management of the financial challenges in Chicago and making the right investments, challenging the city, challenging the people around Wrigleyville in terms of what they're going to do to advance the organization. The patience, they had a 5-year plan, and they said, be patient with us. And the first couple of years were very, very rocky. But look what they did, and they built trust. So they are now a trusted organization. They built trust into their organization. I mean, Joe Madden and his team exhibited leadership every single day. And they built a culture within the team of fun, of joy, of trust, of things that would help them be successful. So they actually created their own culture, and they built that trust. The players showed great leadership on and off the field. They were selfless, they were humble, and they had mutual respect. And so all of these ingredients are the things that, in working together, made them a high-performance team, which is so incredibly rare. Go to the next slide here. And so some definitions for you. There are differences between working groups and teams. And a working group, we see that in associations at boards with the executive leadership team or some of the committees. There are individuals who are independent and working on common tasks. A real team is different than a working group. There are individuals who are interdependent. They depend on each other and are working on a common performance-related goal. That word goal and the word performance are very key to a team. A high-performance team is very rare, but these are team members who are also deeply committed to one another's personal growth and success. On a personal level, I've only served on one high-performing team. It was with the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we did an association management system conversion. We have a group of 7 people charged by the board to deliver this thing in the right time, with the right budget, in the right way. And we were so successful that we bonded as a group of people. Almost everyone who was on that team 5 or 6 years ago is now in other places, in other organizations, yet we've maintained a friendship and a caring for each other that transcends our work at pediatrics. So that's what makes the high-performance team, is that caringness for each other. Teamwork is part of what makes teams successful. It's the values and the behaviors and the attitudes that are taken to shape a team and that helps team become successful. We move on to so the real team has a definition. It's 6 characteristics, small in number. My last board at the American Academy of Periodontology was 26 members. They could never be a team at that size. So when I say small in number, I'm talking about less than double digits. If you're forming a team, have the discipline to not go beyond double digits. Very, very important. Complementary skills. Make sure that you have the right diversity of interests and skills and people and behaviors and styles to make that team successful. Having a purpose. At the American Academy of Pediatrics, our mission statement was dedicated to the health of all children. That was our purpose. The goal is different than the purpose. A goal might be to reduce childhood obesity or to eliminate ADHD, or those are the kinds of things you have as a performance goal on a team. Having a common approach, basically a social contract with each other, is very important. A lot of boards don't have a common approach. They have, certain processes they use, and committees do the same thing. And mutual accountability, very, very important, holding each other accountable to the goal. So these are the 6 characteristics that define a real team. Moving on. This is a model, what I call the requirements for a real team. And in one of these domains is the set of skills that you're looking for: problem-solving skills, technical skills, interpersonal skills, making sure you have this diversity and skill set on your teams or working groups. The accountability, again, that small number, the individual and mutual accountability. As a team member, I have to make a commitment to hold myself accountable to the things I say I'm going to do as a team member. I also have to help others be accountable by having a shared accountability for the entire team. And then the other category is commitment to specific goals of a team, a common approach, and a meaningful purpose. And when you're in an organization or on a team or a working group, you might take this model and say, do we have the right skill set on this team? Do we have the right accountability that we're working towards? Do we have the right commitment from members of this team? You might go back and sort of do your own self-audit of this team that might help correct it and move it into a better direction. Go to the next slide. So examples of working groups and associations would be boards of directors and board committees and functional committees and executive leadership groups and functional groups, et cetera. But on the association side, these are real teams. For example, in one association in 2008-9, they formed a team that navigated the Great Recession, and they did so without losing a single staff member. This is information that came from that leadership summit a few weeks ago. Another group had formed a team to change their association management system altogether. You know how difficult these can be, how there are budget constraints, there are process constraints, there are legacy constraints, there are people constraints, there are all kinds of constraints to make this successful. Launching a national consumer awareness campaign as a goal, forming a team to achieve this goal on budget with the right messaging, with the right media, very, very important. We're designing websites. We're retooling, re-engineering websites every single day. I bet everybody on the call today is probably connected with some adjustment to their website, and forming the right group of people to address these challenges is very, very important. Membership category, you might be looking at membership value. You might be looking at, for example, reducing the membership categories. Pediatrics, for example, we had 23 member categories at one point. We formed a team and said we needed to have a goal to reduce that because it's too complicated before we make a conversion to a new system, and we reduced that to 11 categories. Still too many, but we reduced that by over half. A very, very important accomplishment. Going on then. as you look at your groups that you're either in or leading, you want to consider the communication styles of the people in that group. And there's something called the 4 temperaments or the color palette. And by understanding how others communicate and lead, you will help your team perform better. For example, at Pediatrics, we took the board of directors and other leaders and staff to Toronto for a 2-day leadership development program, and we used this color palette exercise with that group of 70 people. Pediatricians live in that blue bubble. They're very harmonious people. There was about 2 red people in the room of 70, a few greens and a few yellows. When we formed those groups, we had to have 2 groups of blue. There were so many blues. At the American Academy of Periodontology, we did the same thing with the board there, about 26 people, and there wasn't a single red. There were 3 blues, and the rest were greens and yellows. So you can see the nature of an organization can be very different. In my job at Pediatrics, I'm a yellow-blue, and my boss, CEO, was a fire engine red. And he was so red that I had to bring way more yellow out of my nature to off-balance or to balance out his redness, because he's an adventurous guy, making decisions without perhaps some thought or without some information. And I would have to always say, have you thought about the board, what they might think about this decision? Have you thought about the staff? Have you thought about the members? Have you thought about the stakeholders? So I had to bring out more yellow in my normal state to off-balance this great redness, and the balance between us was an outstanding group of leaders. So as you work in your team, some of you may have to bring more of a color that is not your natural color to bring the right color set and diversity to your team. Here's the tool. It's called the Pace Palette Scorecard that we use. You might want to have this facilitated when you first use it, because it helps to take the staff out of harm's way and creates a very objective way to communicate this to your leadership group or even to your staff. Let's go on here. Sorry. The team performance curve is an S-shaped curve with performance impact on the vertical axis and team effectiveness on the horizontal axis. And the different kinds of teams that live on this curve start with the working group on the left. This is a group of people that can be very successful. They can create performance and have an impact. They don't spend a lot of time together, and their effectiveness can be somewhat limited depending on what they do. The next group is a group called the pseudo team, and they often exist in organizations, but they don't really have much of a goal. They're not achieving much. They're just there because they might be a legacy team. If they exist, get rid of them as fast as you can, because they're wasting space. The next group is called a potential team. It's a team that might be stuck. It might have a leadership change that's necessary. It might have to look at its goals, and yet it has the potential to be a full team, and it needs some patience. The next team is the real team. We've talked about that, and the high performance team is up here on the far right of the curve, which is very, very rare. I've only seen one of them in my association work, but if we can get there, they can really deliver great, great value. The next slide is talking about a team maturity journey. And this is where teams are forming and storming and norming and performing. And this graphic says that they actually get bigger and better if they follow these steps. And there are a number of tools that can be used to help them in their development. So, for example, when you're forming a team, there's an exercise called the is not exercise. What is the purpose of this group? And what is our scope? Get that documented. Because later on, when you see that team creeping in its scope, you might go back to the original document and say, here's why we formed, here's what we were intending to do, here's what we were charged to do. Let's make sure we haven't morphed into something different. An operating agreement is a list of things that we agree upon and how we're going to function together, how we're going to behave together. put that in a document, and then from time to time audit that document to see if we are really working towards that end. Storming, there are tools that can be used to envision a future for that team through a backwards imaging tool. Creating a strategy map with the goals of the team, or using a payoff matrix to actually select the right objectives to support the goals, or tools that can be used. Norming is where you start to build out scorecards and do some solutioning exercise to make sure you're on track with the goals. And performing is where you start to build out performance dashboards. And here's where you can bring out an instrument of team audit that will actually check on whether the team is functioning properly. Use that score sheet, about 26 questions, to see how well is this team performing after it's meant to be performing. So these are tools that can be used. In the work I did at Pediatrics, we had 22 different tools in the toolkit, and these are just a few of those. Moving on. The components of an operating agreement, this is what we talked about at the Leadership Summit a few weeks ago. Mutual respect in the group, equal voice, decision-making process. How do we make decisions? What does equal voice mean? It means that everybody, no one's mute. Everyone makes a contribution. Confidentiality, you actually decide how you deal with the information that you're talking about when your team meets. The body language. A timeout feature. Let me come back to the timeout feature. A time commitment. How often do we meet? Is it weekly? What time do we meet? Is it 90 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? What is our commitment to meet? How do we prepare and just come prepared? Celebrating and having fun with things that we accomplish. Whether or not we have agendas and minutes or notes. Those are the things you define on the front end of a team forming, and then you follow that. The timeout feature is where someone can say, we have this agreement, and I'm calling a timeout because the body language that person just gave me bothers me, and I'd like to talk about that. Or somebody walked in late, and we agreed that we're going to be on time. So the timeout allows a person safely to call a timeout and speak to how they can improve the function of the team because they have an operating agreement that calls for these kinds of items. So that's a short list. There are many other things that could be on this list. Let me move on. Leadership is very, very important, and what great leaders say to highly engaged teams, things that I have complete faith in you, you've done a great job, what do you think? What did you learn from this that we can use next time? These are important things that leaders can do to help their team be more functional and engaged. The ideal team player, this is work that comes from Patrick Lencioni, one of my favorite authors. And he has this concept of the ideal team player is someone who is humble, who is hungry, and who is smart. And let me give you some more clarity around each one of these. The humble team player, Kevin, I'm going to have you advance these slides. There you go. They lack excessive ego or concerns about status. They're quick to point out the contributions of others and slow to seek attention for their own. They share credit, emphasize team over self, and define success collectively rather than individually. Lencioni has this instrument of 6 questions. I have taken this assessment, and I found that I personally have a long way to go in these 3 domains of humble, hungry, and smart to be a better team player. But using an instrument will help you. Humility is not thinking less about yourself, but thinking about yourself less. And that's what the very important part about being humble. The next slide is hungry is they're always looking for more things to do, more to learn, more responsibility to take on. Hungry people almost never have to be pushed by a manager to work harder because they're self-motivated and diligent. They're constantly thinking about the next step and the next opportunity. The smart person is the person, it's more about common sense about people. They read the body language. They read the tea leaves. They might communicate with a person before a team meets to help that person be prepared. They might take a person from the team and talk about certain behaviors that were exhibited, but they're helping other people be better because they're smart about people. They know what's happening in the group. They have good judgment and intuition, and it's really, really important to have these people. So when you are on a team right now, you might pull this assessment and say, let's go ahead and score ourselves. When you're forming a team or hiring new people to the organization, you might use this tool to say, we want to hire people who are humble, people who are hungry, and people who are smart, and let's score them before we hire them. It helps you build great performing organizations. We all have a responsibility in a team, and it starts with having a positive attitude, adding your full value, amplifying other voices, know when to say no, and embrace positive conflict. And let me transition now to dysfunctional teams and speak to the fact that this is existing everywhere. When we did this workshop a few weeks ago, heads were nodding up and down because they all experienced this dysfunction. And the work by Lencioni on the 5 dysfunctions of a team is something on the next slide you may have heard about, but there are 5 dysfunctions: the absence of trust, the fear of conflict, the lack of commitment, the avoidance of accountability, and the inattention to results are all components of dysfunction, and we see them all the time. Let's talk about trust for a minute, because in January I'll be doing a webinar on trust, but the work by Covey talks about the economics of trust. And when you have high trust, it really pays off a trust dividend. Real money happens when there's high trust. There's higher speed, there's lower cost, there's real money. When you have low trust, there's a tax, lower speed, and higher cost. Let me give you an example. At the American Academy of Periodontology, I had 26 board members for a $12 million, 8,000-member organization. Pediatrics, I have 13 board members for an organization 10 times the size. And so why was the board so large? Because the people who voted people on the board didn't trust that they would have the representation in their districts if they had fewer people from their district. The executive committee had 5 elected officers, and the board decided to add 2 more people from the board to make it 7. Now the cost, the real money cost of managing a 26-member board because of low trust and a 7-member executive committee because of low trust was real money. So that's just an example of when you don't have trust, it is very, very, very costly to an organization. The next slide speaks about opportunities for failure. I'll move quickly through this. This is just a list of things, and I'll let you read this as content. The next slide is just content I've developed for you all to read. It was generated by the Leadership Summit a few weeks ago. And the transforming a sick team, there are methodologies to actually identify and transform sick teams, and that's an exercise that's very important. And then we, in the survey that Kevin addressed earlier on, this spidergram speaks to some of the responses that came from the Leadership Summit attendees a few weeks ago. And you will see in this next slide, I've taken some of these and summarized them. The question that was asked was, in your organization, how important is each of the following potential challenges to effective team performance? Guess what sits at the top? It's the absence of trust among team members. 88% of the people who responded to that survey said that's what they experience in their organizations. Failure to deal with conflict was a big player. Self over team, a big player. So you can see the elements of the teams that these leaders work on. This is what they reported. So later today, Kevin will distribute a survey, the same survey with 10 questions, which we'd like you to respond to and start to build this content so we can learn more about what's happening in associations, so we can build some content to help in the team function in the future. Let me go on. Key takeaways from this presentation is when you have high performance teams, better decisions are made, increased productivity and energy, greater innovation, higher levels of engagement, there's a spillover effect on others. Think about what the Cubs did for Chicago, for the world, basically, with their successes, shared learning and personal growth, lasting relationships, breakthrough performance, greater speed, a smarter and better organization, and greater trust that takes place when you have teams functioning more effectively. So as we close, I wanted to revisit the objectives and hope that this webinar helped you understand the benefits of the teams, help you lead and serve on teams better, understand dysfunction, and down the road, hopefully this information and what you do to be a better leader will help your organization be a better performing organization. These are some references and some actually more recent references that could be helpful to you are on this next slide. Lencioni's work, Team of Teams, and the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And finally, I would share my contact information with you if you ever need to reach me, have a question, a follow-on thought, or feedback. Please feel free to contact me. I welcome your suggestions and feedback. I thank you for your time this morning. I've run a little bit over, and Kevin has teed up a couple of questions and would welcome your questions. Thank you, Kevin.
Great, John. Thank you very much for that wonderful session. And we do have some time for a couple of questions if everyone wants to use the little comment bubble icon to submit a question. But John, as we're going through this, something that comes to mind is, what are some of those early signs of a dysfunctional team that you can spot? Are there any tips for us to be on the lookout for those early signs?
Yeah, they're kind of easy to see. For example, you might have somebody who dominates the meeting or the team, whose voice is just never ending. And what that does is it mutes out the voice of the other people on the team because that person is so dominant. And it's up to the leader to pull that person aside and have a fierce conversation with that person and say, hang on a second, I'd like you to change things and allow other people to have an equal voice because that's what we agreed upon. And take that person aside and hope that your feedback to that person will help that change. Another example is people walking into meetings late. They just sort of meander in, 3 minutes after the starting point when you agreed that you start on time. And they might be on their phones, checking emails or texting somebody. Those are signs of people who are distracted, not functioning very well. You may have a person who is too quiet on the other side of being too loud and too dominant. And get that person to engage by pulling that person into the team. You may see people who are not preparing very well. They go, I forgot what we agreed upon at the meeting last week, or I forgot what our goal is. Can you remind me? These are signs of teams not working very well. So, and this is where the leader needs to step in, and this is where that operating agreement can be retooled, and the audit could take place to say, how are we functioning? So those are signs of dysfunction.
Great. And earlier, John, you had a chart or a matrix of teams and working groups, but can you just revisit with us what's the difference between the working groups and teams, and can they be the same or do they have to be different?
They're different. A working group can become a team if they have the characteristics of the real team. I'll give you an example. Let's say a board of directors, which is typically a working group, has a burning platform that emerges. It may be a public relations problem. It may be a membership problem. It may be a financial problem. It may be a problem with the leadership of the organization. They can form a unit to fix that problem. That gives them the goal, a common purpose. They would want to resize a group to address that. But they can become a team if they have a performance-related goal to work on. But otherwise, they're pretty well much functioning as a working group. But if they build in some of the characteristics of what I talked about, an operating agreement, clarity around that purpose, holding themselves accountable, they can be more like a team, but they're more like a working group. A team really must have a performance goal. It's all about performance. And they have to hold each other accountable. They have to make sure they comply with their own working agreement. So there is a difference. My board of directors at Periodontology never had an operating agreement. So we pulled that out, and all of a sudden, because they agreed on that operating agreement, their behavior changed. They became a better functioning working group, more like a team, because they held each other accountable to their agreed upon contracts. So every board meeting, that operating agreement was the third page of a 200-page board agenda, because they wanted to make sure they were operating and functioning with what they agreed upon in a previous meeting. I hope that helped. That's helpful.
Great. No, that's great. So if there's no other questions, we'll wrap up. But as we close our final webinar of the year, just a reminder that John's going to continue on his series next month in the new year on January 12th again, on focusing on the high trust. And as you saw from some of our results, trust seems to be a challenge that everyone's been experiencing, and we encourage you to fill out the survey that I'll be sending out later today and see where you're lining up. But I think we've all experienced firsthand that some of the teams that we may be participating on seem to be really too big, and it seems like every single stakeholder is involved, and I think that goes back to the lack of trust. So whether you're revisiting membership structure or implementing a new system, maybe things aren't moving as fast as you would think or efficiently, maybe there's too many people. I think it all goes back to that lack of trust. And John will continue with a conversation with us in the new year. So just want to thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. And John, thank you so much for your great presentation. And we wish everyone a good, safe holidays and New Year. And we'll see you guys in January. So thank you very much. And we'll end the webinar for today.